Today we're diving back into Project 2025. You don't have to see the other episodes of this to understand what's going on. I'll explain. Project 2025 is a document that was written by the far right to describe how they intend to take over the government and convert it to a dictatorship. And they're doing it. This document is being executed as we speak. So I want to read through the whole thing beginning to end. Let's get into it.
That a political appointee lead the ONDCP budget office to ensure coordination between the OMB Program Associate Director and the ONDCP budgetary appointee. ONDCP grant-making activities have been controversial over the years, particularly within conservative administrations, concerned that the White House lacks the expertise to oversee such programs directly. The ONDCP administers two grant programs, the Drug-Free Community Support Program and the High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas Program. While it makes sense to transfer these programs eventually to the Department of Justice and Department of Health and Human Services, respectively, it is vital that the ONDCP director ensure in the immediate term that these grant programs are funding the president's drug control priorities and not woke nonprofit with leftist policy agendas. Thus,
Okay, so they're saying, like, in cases of, fentanyl and stuff like that, it's imperative that these organizations are not doing woke or fulfilling the woke agenda. I find it fascinating they use the word woke so much in this document because that word is kind of like it's almost like a snapshot in time for where the Republican Party was. Like, you don't hear about CRT anymore. No one talks about CRT now. It's all about wokeism or whatever. Throughout time, they keep switching words. They keep using different terms and acronyms and stuff.
The president must ensure that the ONDCP is managed by political appointees who are committed to the administration's agenda and not acquiesce to management by political or career military personnel who oversaw the prior administration's ONDCP. Gender Policy Council. The president should immediately revoke Executive Order 14241 and every policy, including subregulatory guidance documents, produced on behalf of or related to the establishment or promotion of the Gender Policy Council and its subsidiary issues. Abolishing the Gender Policy Council would eliminate central promotion of abortion, health services, comprehensive sexuality education, and the new woke gender ideology, which has as a principal tenet gender-affirming care and sex change surgeries on minors.
Jesus Christ, dude. Do you know how many change operations are done on minors? Pretty much zero. To my knowledge, it's illegal under the age of 18, except in serious situations where it's not like gender reassignment surgery. It's like breast reduction surgery, completely unrelated to gender affirming care or whatever. These people that wrote this, they're not stupid. They're lying. Some of these nutcases are just dumb as dog shit. These people, in my opinion, are not. They know what they're doing. By the way, the algorithm is hitting me hard right now, completely ignoring me. So I'd appreciate if you watch to the end of the video. Having increased watch time as a percentage and a raw number is what pushes the video further. Also check out my books, owenmorgan.com. All right, back to the video.
Eliminating the council, developing new structures and positions will have the dual effect of demonstrating that promoting life and strengthening the family is a priority, while also facilitating more seamless coordination and consistency across the U.S. government. Specifically, the president should appoint a position point of contact with the rank of special assistant to the president or higher to coordinate and lead the president's domestic priorities on issues related to life and family in cooperation with the Domestic Policy Council. This position would be responsible for facilitating meetings, discussions, and agreements among personnel, coordinating administration policy, and ensuring agency support for implementation of policies
So they're describing how they want to kind of change the structure, okay?
related to the promotion of life
Like,
and
I'm not necessarily opposed to a change in structure, as long as it doesn't reduce, or as long as it doesn't centralize power, and as long as it's done in good faith to genuinely make things more efficient. But I don't believe that any of these people that we're listening to right now have those aims in mind.
family in the United States. Office of the Vice President. The Vice President is elected to the second highest office in the nation and plays a constitutionally vital role as President in waiting. The Vice President is also the President of the Senate and is charged with breaking tie votes in that body. In recent years, the Vice President has been granted office space in the West Wing and the Eisenhower Executive Office Building. The OVP is another one of the levers that the President should use to execute his agenda. This is particularly true because there is significant and unique leverage that the Vice President's leadership of the OVP can evoke.
So this whole time they've been talking about centralizing power under the president, under the executive branch specifically, trying to make it so that the president has all of the power of government and, Congress is neutered. The judiciary is neutered. They have no power in government. So what they're describing here is how to do that.
Shape policy, discussions, and outcomes. Every other appointed White House office serves at the pleasure of the president, whereas the vice president is elected and the process for filling vacancies in that Article 2 constitutional office, which includes confirmation of a replacement vice president by a majority of both houses of Congress, is governed by the 25th Amendment. 40. The vice president has his or her own economic advisors, domestic policy and national security staff, and daily intelligence briefing. The vice president should fill his or her office with strong and sound policy minds to effectively assist the president in fulfilling his agenda. The vice president is also a statutory member of the National Security Council. 43. In theory, in light of the fact that the vice president is a member of the Smithsonian Institution's Board of Regents. 44. There is nothing to prevent Congress from assigning the vice president additional statutory duties. All of the component councils in office discussed in this chapter include real policy development and implementation authority, and a robust OVP should be fully integrated into all policy formation procedures. Only a vice president who is deeply steeped in the inner working of the interagency and policy councils can offer useful advice and prove helpful in accomplishing the president's agenda. It is also obvious, in view of the fact that many former vice presidents have gone on to be elected president in their own right, 45, that the vice presidency can act as a training ground for presidential office.
I don't think that J.D. Vance had been chosen as the vice president yet when this was written, to my knowledge.
In the past, the vice president has been tasked with leading certain initiatives or issues. For example, Mike Pence was tasked with coordinating the federal response to COVID-19, and both Pence and Kamala Harris have chaired the National Space Council. Vice Presidents Richard Cheney and Dan Quayle were also active on the deregulatory front and in imposing regulatory moratoria. However, OVP of Shields should be fully integrated into each and every process from the start of a new administration, and not have to wait to be invited to join various meetings or working groups on an ad hoc basis. For example, the budget and regulatory review processes are linchpins in the execution of policy, and the OVP should have a seat at the table through every phase of policy development. Past vice presidents have also spent significant time abroad, serving as a type of brand ambassador for the White House and more broadly for the United States, announcing administration priorities and coordinating with heads of state and other top officia of foreign governments. The vice president, as president of the Senate, often serves as a presidential emissary to the Senate, and thus can be especially helpful in securing passage of the president's legislative agenda. To the extent that he or she desires, a vice president can have a direct role in shaping administration policy. A vice president who regularly attends meetings and disperses staff across the interagency and policy councils is a vice president whose voice will be heard. Author's note.
Yes, so the vice president is very powerful is the point. Absolutely. So I guess they're saying you got to pick the vice president carefully. The author's note they're about to lay down, this is the end of a chapter. Not the end of a section, but the end of a chapter. I think it's the last chapter in section 1.
Thanks to those who contributed to this chapter. Stephen Billy, Scott Pace, Casey Mulligan, Edie Heipel, Mike Duff, Vance Ginn, Ian Murray, Laura Cunliffe, Mario Loyola, Anthony Campau, Paige Agostin, Molly Sykes, Paul Ray, Kenneth A. Klukowski, Michael Anton, Robert Greenway, Valerie Huber, James Rockus, Paul Winfrey, Aaron Headland, Brian McCormack, David Legates, Art Kleinschmidt, Paul Larkin, Kayla Tonnessen, Jeffrey B. Clark, Jonathan Wolfson, and Bob Burkett.
Okay, wow, that was a lot of names.
Central Personnel Agencies, Managing the Bureaucracy, Donald Devine, Dennis Dean Kirk, and Paul Dans. From the very
Oh my God, it's still going.
first mandate for leadership, the personnel is policy theme has been the fundamental principle guiding the government's personnel management. As the U.S. Constitution makes clear, the president's appointment, direction, and removal author, people, and the president deserve the most talented and responsible workforce possible. Who the president assigns to design and implement his political policy agenda will determine whether he can carry out the responsibility given to him by the American people. The president must recognize that whoever holds a government position sets its policy. To fulfill an electoral mandate, he must therefore give personnel management his highest priority, including cabinet-level precedence. The federal government's immense bureaucracy spreads into hundreds of agencies and thousands of units and is centered and overseen at the top by key central personnel agencies and their governing laws and regulations. The major separate personnel agencies in the national government today are the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, the Merit Systems Protection Board, MSPB, the Federal Labor Relations Authority, FLRA, and the Office of Special Counsel, OSC.
Yeah, so they're listing offices in the executive branch that they want to seize control of, I guess one might say.
Title V of the U.S. Code charges the OPM with executing, administering, and OPM direct responsibility for activities like retirement, pay, health training, federal unionization, suitability, and classification functions not specifical granted to other agencies by statute. The agency's director is charged with aiding the president, as the president may request, in preparing such civil service rules as the president prescribes and otherwise advising the president on actions that may be taken to promote an efficient civil service and a systematic application of the merit system principles, including recommending policies relating to the selection, promotion, transfer, performance, pay, conditions of service, tenure, and separation of employees. The MSPB is the lead adjudicator for hearing and resolving cases in contro.
So they're saying that this organization in the executive branch is like HR, and we want to take control of HR because they are capable of hiring and firing people at will, and we want to be able to like get rid of federal employees, as much as we want, which we're seeing now. We're watching all this play out now, of course.
Case adjudications, regulatory reviews, and actions and studies to improve the workforce. Its court-like adjudications investigate and hear appeals from agency actions such as furloughs, suspensions, demotions, and terminations, and are appealable to the U.S. Court of Appeals. The FLRA hears appeals of agency personnel cases involving federal labor grievance procedures to provide judicial review with binding decisions appealable to organizations, on management rights, OPM interpretations, recognition of labor organizations, and unfair labor practices.
They're describing the structure of one of the government agencies and why they need to seize control. Yeah.
Under the general principle of bargaining in good faith and compelling need. The OSC serves as the investigator, mediator, publisher, and prosecutor before the MSPB with respect to agency and employees regarding prohibited person GREP. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, has general responsibility for reviewing charges of employee discrimination against all civil rights breaches. However,
so they can completely ignore civil rights breaches if they gain control of this office, is what they're saying, I think.
It also administers a government employee section that investigates and adjudicates federal employee complaints concerning equal employment factor in government personnel management. While not a personnel agency per se, the General Services Administration, GSA, contractors in government than there are civil service employees. The GSA must therefore be a part of any personnel management discussion. Analysis and recommendations. OPM, managing the federal bureaucracy. At the very pinnacle of the modern progressive program to make government competent stands the ideal of professionalized career civil service. Since the turn of the 20th century, progressives have sought a system that could effectively select, train, reward, and guard from partisan influence the neutral scientific experts they believe are required to staff the national government and run the administrative state. Their U.S. system was initiated by the Pendleton Act of 1883-10 and institutionalized by the 1930s New Deal.
Some of this is like designed for lawyers to understand, but I still feel it's very important that we go through the whole thing beginning to end.
To set principles and practices that were meant to ensure that expert merit rather than partisan favors or personal favoritism ruled within the federal bureaucracy.
So they're saying that the Pendleton Act or whatever was designed to make sure that like the EPA and the FDA, the USDA, and all those other organizations are staffed with scientists that know what they're talking about and know what they're doing to create regulation and things for companies. And this is saying we want to replace those scientists with political actors.
Yet, as public frustration with the civil service has grown, generating calls to drain the swamp, it has become clear that their project has had serious unintended consequences. The civil service was devised to replace the amateurism and presumed corruption of the old spoil system, wherein government jobs rewarded loyal partisans who might or might not have professional backgrounds.
Wow, dude, that's crazy what they're saying right now. They're saying before it was set up in such a way that like the EPA was staffed by, or EPA-like organizations were staffed by scientists. Before that was the case, they used to be staffed with political partisan actors, whether they were experts on the subject or not. And more often than not, they weren't back before all of this. And now they're saying we want to get back to that, I guess.
Though the system appeared to be sufficient for the nation's first century, progressive intellectuals and activists demanded a more professionalized, scientific, and politically neutral administration. Progressives designed a merit system to promote expertise and shield bureaucrats from partisan political pressure.
Wow. Progressives created a system where scientific expertise was required to regulate companies, and that's a bad thing.
But it soon began to insulate civil servants from accountability.
It insulated them from accountability. Well, great, fine. If there's something that somebody is doing wrong, sue them. That's the American way. Sue them. Sue the system. Send it through the courts so that the courts can adjudicate if this is okay. There are always ways of recourse. There's always some way to stop whatever is happening. Even with Donald Trump, there's a way to stop what he's doing right now. It's called impeachment. Is it going to work? Not necessarily, but you can, go through the courts. You can adjudicate. There are things you can do, steps you can take. It's not completely shielded from accountability. So what I'm talking about is like these people, these scientists, they were not shielded from accountability.
The merit system increasingly made it almost impossible to fear all but the most incompetent civil servants. Complying with arcane rules regarding recruiting, rating, hiring, and firing simply replaced the goal of cultivating competence and expertise. In the 1970s, Georgia Democratic Governor Jimmy Carter, then a political unknown, ran for president supporting New Deal programs and their Great Society expansion, but opposing the way they were being administered. The policies were not actually reducing poverty, increasing prosperity, or improving the environment, he argued, and to make them work required fundamental bureaucratic reform. He correctly charged that almost all government employees were rated as successful, all received the same pay regardless of performance, and even the worst were impossible to fire.
Okay, I don't know what was going on back then or if any of this is even true. These people have a tendency to, at best, cherry pick and at worst, just straight up lie about these things. But we live in a different situation, either way, a different world now. Whatever Jimmy Carter was saying literally 50 to 75 years ago is completely irrelevant to today. Scientists should be in charge of the EPA, the FDA, and USAID and USDA and whatever else. They should be the ones making these decisions, not partisan political actors, which is what these people are advocating. They're saying we don't want scientists in this position anymore. We want partisan political extremists in these positions. How can you possibly justify that? This is exactly what they did in what the pro-Hitler people did in the 1940s in the United States. They wanted to support Hitler, but it might have been viewed as treason because Hitler was so adversarial to the United States. They couldn't come out and support Hitler openly. So what did they do? They started the America First Party. They said, we want to take care of America first. We don't want all of these, sanctions on Germany, or we don't want to send aid to other countries. We want to take care of our own country. And we have the exact same thing happening right now with the America First Party. We don't want to help Ukraine. We want to help America. FYI, helping Ukraine does help America. But that aside, that's what's happening right now, what they're talking about in this document here, in Project 2025, Section 1.
The same pay, regardless of performance, and even the worst were impossible to fur, and he won the presidency. President Carter fulfilled his campaign promise by...
So they're not... they want to install political actors, like political partisan nutcases, into these positions in federal programs. But they aren't, instead of coming out and saying, we want to install political partisan nutcases in these positions, they're saying, we want to remove the scientists. It's the same as America First. We don't want to help Hitler. We want to hurt the ones that are there now.
Hiring Syracuse University Dean Alan Campbell, who served first as chairman of the U.S. Civil Service Commission and then as director of the OPM, and helped him devise and pass the civil bureaucracy. A new performance appraisal system was devised with a 5 rather than 3 distribution of rating categories and individual goals, more related to agency missions and more related to employee promotion for all. Pay and benefit were based directly on improved performance appraisals, including sizable bonuses for mid-level managers and senior executives. But time ran out on President Carter before the act could be fully executed, so it was left to President Ronald Reagan and his new OPM and agency leadership to implement. Overall, the new law seemed to work for a few years under Reagan, but the Carter-Reagan reforms were dissipated within a decade. Today, employee evaluation is back to pre-reform levels, with almost all rated successful or above.
Again, they're just attacking civil servants that are scientists and that are just there to do their job and stuff in an effort to justify replacing them with partisan extremists. Just really, really disgusting shit.
Rating any real tie-in between pay and performance. An outstanding rating should be required for senior executive service chiefs to win big bonuses. But a few years ago, when it was disclosed that the Veterans Administration executives who encouraged false reporting of waiting lists for hospital admission were rated outstanding, the Senior Executive Association justified it, telling Congress that only outstanding performers would be promoted to the SES in the first place, and that precise ratings were UNNEC, pay raises, within-grade pay increases, and locality pay for regular employees and executives have become automatic rather than based on performance, as a result of most employees being rated at similar appraisal.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't believe that. They're saying that employees are rated as outstanding, whether they're actually outstanding or not. They're saying that people in the federal government don't even care, if job performance is good. That's just a lie. They're just lying. It's just a flat out fictitious, it's just a flat out fabrication.
Levels. 13. Merit hiring in a merit system. It should not be impossible, even for a large national government, to hire good people through merit selection. The government did so for years, but it has proven difficult in recent times to select personnel based on their knowledge, skills, and abilities, KSA, as the law dictates.
Interesting. So they're saying that hiring people based on merit, which, by the way, is what's happening. Scientists who have, experience in this field should be in these organizations. They're saying that that's preferable now and that it's not based on merit. Pick one. Are these people scientists that are qualified for the job or not?
For the past 34 years, the U.S. Civil Service has been unable to distinguish consistently between strong and unqualified applicants for employment. As the Carter presidency was winding down, the U.S. Department of Justice and top lawyers at the OPM,
again, half this shit is lies, so don't buy it,
contrived with plaintiff to end civil service IQ examinations because of concern about their possible impact on minorities. The OPM had used the Professional and Administrative Career Examination, PACE, General Intelligence Exam to select college graduates for top agency employment. But Carter administration official, probably without the president's informed concurrence, abolished the PACE through a legal consent court decree, capitulating to demands by civil rights petitioners who contended that it was discriminatory. The The judicial decree was to last only 5 years, but still controls federal hiring and is applied to all KSA tests even today. General ability tests like the PACE have been used successfully to assess the usefulness and cost-effectiveness of broad intellectual qualities across many separate occupations. Courts have ruled that even without evidence of overt intentional discrimination, such results might suggest discrimination. This doctrine of disparate impact could be ended legislatively or at least narrowed through the regulatory process by a future administration.
So it sounds to me like they're saying, we want to end any examples or any case where people are being treated fairly, where people are setting out to treat others fairly. We want to eliminate any cases of that. White people only should have the advantage here.
In any event, the federal government has been denied the use of a rigorous entry examination for 3 decades, relying instead on self-evaluations that have forced managers to resort to subterfuge such as pre-selecting friends or associates that they believe are competent to obtain qualified employees. In 2015, President Barack Obama's OPM began to introduce an improved merit examination called U.S. Hire, which it had been testing quietly since 2012 in a few agencies for
Testing quietly? What, are you saying that they were trying to hide the fact that they were testing out new qualification standards? What?
job descriptions. The tests had multiple choice questions with only one correct answer. Some questions even required essay replies, questions that would change regularly to depress cheating. President Donald Trump's OPM planned to implement such changes, but was delayed because of legal concerns over possible disparate impact. Courts have agreed to review the consent decree if the uniform guidelines on employee selection procedures setting the technical requirements for sound exams are reformed. A government that is unable to select employees based on KSA-like test qualification cannot work, and the OPM must move forward on this very basic personnel management obligation, the centrality of performance appraisal. In the meantime, the OPM must manage the workforce it has. Before they can reward or discipline federal employees, managers must first identify who their top performers are and who is performing less than adequately. In fact, as Ludwig von Mises proved in his classic Bureaucracy, 14, unlike the profit and loss evaluation tool used in the private sector, government performance measurement depends totally on a functioning appraisal system.
So they're saying there needs to be a system of analyzing people's performance on the job. Okay, yeah, great, fine. There is one, but all right, you want to improve it, fine, I don't care.
If they cannot be identified in the first place within a functioning appraisal system, it is impossible to reward good performance or correct poor performance. The problem is that the collegial atmosphere of a bureaucracy in a multifaceted appraisal system that is open to appeals makes this every challenging ideal to implement successfully. The GAO reported more recently that overly high and widely spread performance ratings were again plaguing the government, with more than 99% of employees rated fully successful or above by their managers, a mere 0.3%. It is...
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't buy any of the things that they say, but either way, these people are the best in the field, the best that can be found. A government job is very stable. Everybody wants a government job. There are a ton of candidates. You can't just go in there and get a government job because of how stable it is. So naturally, it's going to be the best in the business.
Human nature that no one appreciates being told that he or she is less than outstanding in every way. Informing subordinates in a closely knit bureaucracy that they are not performing well is difficult. Rating compatriots is even considered rude and unprofessional. Moreover,
rating employees is rude? What the f are they talking about? Who told them that rating employee performance is rude? That's like a part of every company.
Can be and often are accused of racial or sexual discrimination for a poor rating, and this discourages honesty. Hiring agencies to reduce the time for employees to improve performance before corrective action could be taken. To initiate disciplinary actions against poorly performing employees more expeditiously. To reiterate that agencies are obligated to make employees improve. To reduce the time for employees to respond to allegations of poor performance. To mandate that agencies remind supervisors of expiring employee probationary periods.
Brother, what are you talking about? You think that this shit is not happening in like government offices, in like the USDA? You think they don't have an employee evaluation department? They do, of course. They did. They have this whole time. And again, it's the best of the best that work for government.
To prohibit agencies from entering into settlement agreements that modify an employee's personnel record, and to reevaluate procedures for agencies to discipline supervisors who retaliate against whistleblowers. Unfortunately, the order was overturned by the Biden administration, 17, so it will need to be reintroduced in 2025.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just don't buy any of it. Unfortunately, this whole merit-based thing that they're complaining about, this fictitious thing that doesn't exist, is irrelevant now anyway, since Trump is just destroying the federal workforce.
Fact remains that meaningfully evaluating employees' performance is a critical part of a manager's job. In the Reagan appraisal process, managers were evaluated on how they themselves rated their subordinates. This is critical to responsibility and improved management. It is essential that political executives build policy goals directly into employee appraisals, both for mission success and for employees to know what is expected. Indistinguishable from their coworkers on paper, hardworking federal employees often go unrewarded for their effort and are often the system's greatest critics. Federal workers who are performing inadequately get neither the benefit of an honest appraisal nor clear guidance on how to improve. Political executives should take an active role in supervising performance appraisals of career staff, not unduly delegate this responsibility to senior career managers, and be willing to reward and support good performers. Performance appraisal means little to daily operations if it is not tied directly to real consequences for success as well as failure. According to a survey of major U.S. private companies, which, unlike the federal government, also have a profit and loss evaluation, 90% use a system of merit pay for performance based on some type of appraisal system.
So they're saying this appraisal system, this merit-based system, it does actually exist in government. We do have this system in government. So what are you even complaining about right now?
Despite early effort to institute merit pay throughout the federal government, however, compensation is still based primarily on seniority rather than merit. Merit pay for executives and managers was part of the Carter reforms and was implemented early in the Reagan presidency. Beginning in the summer of 1982, the Reagan OPM entered 18 months of negotiations with House and Senate staff on extending merit pay to the entire workforce.
Yeah, these people, as we've found, they were just looking for an opportunity to, quote unquote, traumatize the federal workforce, and they found it.
Long and detailed talks between the OPM and both Democrats and Republicans in Congress ensued, and a fine agreement was reached in 1983 that supposedly ensured the passage of legislation creating a new performance management and recognition system, PMRS, for all, not just management, GS-13 through GS-15 employees. Meanwhile, the OPM issued regulations to expand the role of performance related to pay throughout the entire workforce.
If you're unfamiliar, GS, I forget what it stands, government something, but that's like the ranks that you have pretty much. And my mom was in the military, and she received a ranking of like GS3 or GS5. I don't even know what it was. I don't even remember. I have no idea. But people can move up and down the ranks, and each scale, each level that you hit, you get higher pay. My mom was pretty low level in the military, actually, but she ended up getting a pension, which, again, goes up and down based on where you are on the scale. And it's like uniform across the entire government, pretty much. So that's what they're talking about.
But congressional allies of the employee unions, led by Representative Steny Hoyer D. of Government Employee Rich, Maryland, stoutly resisted this extension of pay for performance and, with strong union support, used the congressional appropriations process to block OPM administrative pay reforms. Bonuses for SES career employees survived, but performance appraisals became so high and widely distributed that there was little relationship between performance and remuneration.
Right. So now they're saying we want to eliminate performance-based raises. Basically, they're trying to destroy income of federal employees. To be honest with you, federal employees don't even make that much money. Certainly not compared to the rest of the field. But they do have a lot of stability that other organizations or whatever don't have. That's why somebody would want to be a federal employee in the first place.
Ever since the original merit pay system for federal managers, GM13 through GM15 grade levels, just below the...
I guess government manager, GM, is that what that stands for? I'm not sure what the S is in GS. Government service, somebody's telling me. Government service. That could be it.
SES was allowed to expire in September 1993. Little to nothing has been done either to reinstate the federal merit pay program for managers or to distribute performance rating evaluations for the SES, much less to extend the program to the remainder of the workforce. A reform-friendly president and Congress might just provide the opportunity to create a more comprehensive performance plan. In the meantime, however, political executives should use existing pay, and especially FISC awards, strategically to reward good performance to the degree allowed by law, making the appeals process work. The non-military government dismissal rate is well below 1%, and no private sector industry employee enjoys the job security that a federal employee enjoys. Both safety and justice demand that managers learn to act strategically to hire good and fur poor performers legally. The initial paperwork required to separate poor or abusive performers, when they are infrequently identified, is not overwhelming, and managers might be motivated to act if it were not for the appeals and enforcement processes.
Okay, so these appeals and all this stuff, these processes that they're attacking now, are in place as a result of unions. Unions fought for these things. Unions are like kryptonite to billionaires. They can't stand unions. We should be supporting all unions everywhere as much as we possibly can. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me that Project 2025 people would attack unions like this.
Appeal in the private sector is mostly a rather simple two-step process, but government unions and associations have been able to convince politicians to support a multiple and extensive appeals and enforcement process. As noted, there are multiple administrative appeals bodies. The FLRA, OSC, and EOC have relatively narrow jurisdictions. Claims that an employee's removal or disciplinary actions violate the terms of a collective bargaining agreement between an agency and a union are handled by the FLRA, Employees who claim their removal was the result of discrimination can appeal to the EEOC, and employees who believe their firing was retribution for being a whistleblower can go to the OSC. While the
So destroy those organizations then is my read on what they intend to do or what they intend to promote. They're already destroying those organizations now that they're in power.
MSPB specializes in abuses of direct merit system issues. It can and does hear and review almost any of the matters heard by the other agencies. Cases involving race, gender, religion, age, pregnancy, disability, or national origin can be appealed to the EEOC or the MSPB, and in some cases to both, and to the OSC. This gives employees multiple opportunities to prove their cases. And while the EEOC, MSPB, FLRA, and OSC may all apply essentially the same burden of proof, the odds of success may be substantially different in each forum. In fact, forum shopping among them for a friendlier venue is a common practice, but frequent filers face no consequences for frivolous complaints.
Well, I mean, forum shopping has always existed in all kinds of different contexts in the United States. That doesn't surprise me at all, of course, but people are still entitled to appeals processes and stuff. Like if they're fired for something, which is what they're talking about here, they're fired, or if they're laid off, or if they're mistreated, or they don't receive a raise or whatever, these people can go to these basically HR for the government. OPM, I guess, I think it's OPM is what it's called. And they can appeal and ask for somebody to take another look. And they can take another look, and if they say, nope, they're right, that's it. That's the end of the line. That's how it works. Every organization should have this. The fact that the U.S. government was the only organization that had that type of thing, or one of very few, is the shameful part. That's the sad bit.
As a result, meritorious cases are frequently delayed, denying relief and justice to truly aggrieved individuals. The MSPB can and does handle all such matters, but it faces a backlog of an estimated 3,000 cases of people who were potentially wrongfully terminated or disciplined.
So they're saying, like, we shouldn't even, we should just destroy it. We should just get rid of this appeals process for people who were wrongly terminated.
As far back as 2013. From 2017 to 2022, the MSPB lacked the quorum required to decide appeals.
Like, notice they're talking about an organization that is not performing as well as they want it because it's overloaded. And their solution is not to fund it better, not to assign more people to it, but to destroy it. Are you shitting me right now?
On the other hand, as of January 2023, the EEOC had a backlog of 42,000 cases. While federal employees win appeals relatively infrequently, MSPB administrative judges have upheld agency decisions as much as 80% of the time. Their real problem is the time and paperwork involved in the elaborate process that managers must undergo during appeals. This keeps even the best managers from bringing cases in, all but the most egregious cases of poor performance or misconduct. As a result, the MSPB, EEOC, FLRA, and OSC...
That's just nonsense. That's not how this works. People get fired for things all the time. It doesn't have to be just absolutely egregious. It takes the best of the best to even get hired to work in government in the first place.
We see very few cases compared to the number of occurrences, and non-performers continue to be paid and often are placed in non-work positions. Having a choice of appeals is especially unique to the government. If lower priority issues were addressed in-house, serious adverse actions would be less subject to delay. With the proper limitation of labor union actions, the FLRA should have limited reason for appeals. The EEOC's federal employee section should be transferred to the MSPB, and many of the OCS's investigatory functions should be returned to the OPM. The MSPB could then become the main reviewer of adverse actions, greatly simplifying the burdensome appeal process, making civil service benefit economically and administratively rational. In recent years, the combined wages and benefit of the executive branch civilian workforce totaled $300 billion, according to OFISA data. But even that amount does not properly account for billions in unfunded liability for retirement and other government reporting distortions.
So we should be cutting retirement funding then? Am I reading this correctly?
OFISA data also report employment as approximately 2 million, but this ignores approximately 20 million contractors who, while not eligible for government pay and benefit, do receive them indirectly through contracting, even if they are less generous. OFISA data also claim that national government employees are paid less than private sector employees are paid for similar work, but several more neutral sources demonstrate that public sector workers make more on average than their private sector counterparts. All of this
I'm not sure if that's true. I was under the impression that they do not. And of course, I don't trust a single word out of these people's mouths, like not one. I was pretty confident that you make more money in the private sector, but it's not as stable.
Deserves close scrutiny. Market-based pay and benefit. According to current law, federal workers are to be paid wages comparable to equivalent private sector workers rather than compared to all private sector employees. While the OFISA studies claim that federal employees are underpaid relative to the private sector by 20% or more, a 2016 Heritage Foundation study found that...
Oh, the Heritage Foundation studied it. I see. That's why we got those numbers. No, they are underpaid. They are dramatically underpaid, as I expected. And they even said there was a study that showed it. But our study, from this organization that is about as partisan as they come, our study says that they're overpaid. Yeah. Okay.
Federal employees received wages that were 22% higher than wages for similar private sector workers. If the value of employee benefit was included, the total compensation premium for federal employees over their private sector equivalents increased to between pay premium and a 61% total compensation premium. 19. Base salary is only one component of a federal employee's total compensation. In addition to high starting wages, federal employees normally receive an annual cost of living adjustment available to all employees and generous scheduled raises known as step increases. Moreover, a large proportion of federal employees are stationed in the Washington, D.C. area and other large cities and are entitled to steep locality pay enhancement to account for the high cost of living in these areas. A federal employee with 5 years' experience receives 20 vacation days, 13 paid sick days, and all 10 federal holidays, compared to an employee at a large private company who receives 13 days of vacation and 8 paid sick days.
Okay, so are they complaining that people get vacation days? They get more vacation days? Like, are you shitting me right now?
Federal health benefits are more comparable to those provided by Fortune 500 employers, with the government paying 72% of the weighted average premiums. But this...
Wow. Yes, I was correct. They are complaining that people have health care and that they have the ability to appeal when when they're mistreated. That is just sad.
Is much higher than for most private plans. Almost half of private firms do not offer any employer contributions at all. The obvious solution to these discrepancies is to move closer to a market model for federal pay and benefit.
They make less at the federal government. Everybody should have access to healthcare, full access. This is just disgusting, dude. These people are vile. They are vile.
One need is for a neutral agency to oversee pay hiring decisions, especially for high-demand occupations. The OPM is independent of agency operations, so it can assess requirements more neutrally. For many years, with its special pay rates program, the OPM evaluated claims that federal rates in an area were too low to attract competent employees and allowed agencies to offer higher pay when needed, rather than increased rates for all. Ideally, the OPM should establish an initial pay schedule for every occupation and region, monitor turnover rates and applicant-to-position ratios, and adjust pay and recruitment on that basis. Most of this requires legislation, but the OPM should be an advocate for a true equality of benefit between the public and private sectors.
Interesting. Most of this requires legislation. I guess we've just thrown that right out the window, right? Like Trump is completely discarding the need for legislation, and he's just writing executive orders like they're laws. By the way, that is exactly what Hitler did when he took control March 1933. He took control in January, but March 1933, like 2 months later, about this point in time, actually, in the Trump administration, Hitler he used the Enabling Act. The Enabling Act allowed him to create laws without Congress. Executive orders, effectively. Now, executive orders have limits in the form of like judicial review and things like that. But Trump is just ignoring those limits, just completely discarding them. Does not care about those limits. So we are effectively in a scenario where executive order, where Trump is basically writing law. He's just writing the law, with or without Congress.
Reforming federal retirement benefit. Career civil servants enjoy retirement benefit that are nearly unheard of in the private sector. Federal employees retire earlier, normally at age 55 after 30 years, enjoy richer pension annuities, and receive automatic cost of living adjustments based on the areas in which they retire.
The gall. People getting a fair wage and all of that? Not under my government, right?
Define benefit.
Is this voice AI? It kind of sounds like a deeper version of Spirit Science shitbags. Yeah, it is. It's AI. And it's pretty good, right? I think, anyway.
Federal pensions are fully indexed for inflation, a practice that is extremely rare in the private sector. A federal employee with a pre-retirement income of $25,000 under the older of the two federal retirement plans will receive at least $200,000 more over a 20-year period than will private sector workers with the same pre-retirement salary under historic inflation levels.
Yeah, so what they're saying now, they're attempting to twist things around to make it out like government employees are, what do they call it, living high on the hog? Is that the term they use?
During the early Reagan years, the OPM reformed many specified provisions of the federal pension program to save billions administratively. Under OPM pressure, Reagan and Congress ultimately ended the old Civil Service Retirement System, CSRS, entirely for new employees, which, counting disbursements for the unfunded liability, accounted for 51.3% of the federal government's total payroll. And that replaced it. The Federal Employees Retirement System, FERS, reduced the cost of federal employee retirement disbursements to 28.5% of payroll, including contributions to Social Security and the employer match to the Thrift Savings Plan. More of the pension cost was shifted to the employee, but the new system was much more equitable for the 40% who received few or no benefit under the old system.
Okay, I'm sorry, but people shouldn't receive little or no benefits. Like everybody should have a retirement plan, period. That's just how it should work, like Social Security. But Republicans trying to destroy that too right now.
1999, more than half of the federal workforce was
Why are they comparing it to private companies? Just makes me think the private companies are just shit when it comes to benefits. Oh, they all are, yeah. And uh, the government isn't as bad when it comes to benefits, but the pay is much lower, and um, and it's a lot more stable. Aside from that, though, God, there's something else I want to say about this. I'm trying to remember now. When you're hiring people, you do have to take into consideration like the benefits and things. Like, I think it costs something like 20% more than you're paying in their salary just to retain them as an employee, with the taxes that come along with it and all of the other things that you have to pay to have an employee in the first place.
covered by the new system, and the government's per capita share of the cost as the employer was less than half the cost of the old system, 20.2% of FERS payroll versus 44.3% of CSRS payroll, representing one of the largest examples of government savings anywhere. Although the government pension system has become more like private pension systems.
Okay, so you catch what they just said there? Cost savings. They're trying to save money by paying employees less. That's not how you save money in the government. You save money, or you gain money, I suppose, by taxing billionaires more. We should be taxing the shit out of billionaires. No more billionaires making over $2 billion. That people like that shouldn't exist. It should be taxed at 99% beyond $2 billion, every penny. You want to have 100 billion, fine, but the government's going to get 1,000 of that, or whatever. I don't know. If you want to have another billion, you'd have to have 1,000 or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Be 100. So you want to have 10 billion more, you have to make 1,000 billion for that.
It still remains much more generous, and other means might be considered in the future to move it even closer to private plans. GSA, Landlord and Contractor Management. The General Services Administration is best known as the federal government's landlord, designing, constructing, managing, and preserving government buildings and leasing and managing outside commercial real estate contracting with 376.9 million square feet of space. Obviously, as its prime function, real estate expertise is key to the GSA success. However, the GSA is also the government's purchasing agent, connecting federal purchasers with commercial products and services in the private sector and their personnel management functions. With contractors performing so many functions today, the GSA therefore becomes a de facto part of government-wide personnel management. The GSA also manages the Presidential Transition Act (PTA) process, which also directly involves the OPM. A recent proposal would have incorporated the OPM and GSA and OMB. Fortunately, this did not take place in that form, but it would make sense for GSA and OPM leadership and staff to hold regular meetings to work through matters of common interest, such as moderating PTA personnel restrictions and the relationships between contract and civil service employees. Reductions in force. Reducing the number of federal employees seems an obvious way to reduce the overall expense of the civil service, and many prior administrations have attempted to do just this.
We shouldn't be reducing the cost of the civil service. We should be increasing the cost of taxes on billionaires.
Presidents Bill Clinton and Barack Obama.
Like, why do they even want all that money, billionaires? Like, what's the point of having all of that shit? What are they going to do with $10 billion that they couldn't do with $8 billion or $2 billion or whatever?
Began their terms, as did Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, by mandating.
You don't think 67% is enough? No, I don't. For billionaires, no, absolutely not. Should be what it was under Eisenhower, under FDR. I'm talking like 90% for if you make $1 billion, you should pay 90% in taxes in all seriousness. If you make $50 million, it should be maybe 60%. If you make 1 million, maybe 50%, and maybe 400,000, you should pay 40%. I don't know. I haven't thought it out like in a lot of detail yet. I'm just kind of throwing out numbers mostly. So over 400,000, 40%, and then over 200,000, 20%, and then under 200,000, 15% across the board, in my opinion. And also, we should have a capital gains tax. So if people are making money in the stock market, they're taxed for that too. Because right now it's 15%. Tax it like it's regular income, because it is effectively. Those poor super rich people, I know, right? But won't that create an unreasonable surplus of taxes that will increase government corruption? No? What? What are you talking? No. Why do you think that? I don't understand. Where did you even get that idea? We can't have too many taxes. We can't have too much money to take care of the poor. No, I'm sorry. I'm making fun. I don't I don't want to hurt your feelings. I'm just joking. No. The answer is no. That won't be a problem. We can put money into all kinds of things like helping the homeless and stuff. And you know what? Oops, I'm sorry. And you know what? Even if it didn't, even if it wasn't used for useful things like helping the homeless or whatever, I would still want to increase taxes to make sure that billionaires don't gain so much wealth and power that they can purchase a presidency the way that they did with Donald Trump. I do not want that under any circumstances. That's the thing. They still won't take care of the poor, right? Yeah, but you won't have billionaires buying elections like that anymore. Also, while we're at it, since this is, fantasy land that I'm creating, I also want to get money out of politics permanently. You cannot take donations or create political ads using anybody's money or anything ever unless it's single donors, and they are not allowed to donate to your political campaign unless it's more than unless it's under like $100. Everybody pays under $100 each. Right now we have super PACs who say, we're not associated with the campaign. We don't even know the guy. We just like him. That's all. And they're spending billions of dollars that are donated from Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and people like that on ads. And they're allowed to do that because they don't know the candidate. They have no connection to him. They know nothing about him.
On the hiring of new federal employees, but these efforts did not lead to permanent and substantive reductions in the number of non-defense federal employees. First, it is a challenge even to know which workers to cut. As mentioned, there are 2 million federal employees, but since budgets have exploded, so has the total number of personnel, with nearly 10 times more federal contractors than federal employees. Contractors are less expensive because they are not entitled to high government pensions or benefit and are easier to defer and discipline. In addition, millions of state government employees work under federal grants, in effect administering federal programs. These cannot be cut directly. Cutting federal employment can be helpful and can provide
Oh, that's really interesting. One more time on that?
programs. These cannot be cut directly.
Wait, what can't be cut directly?
Contractors are less expensive because they are not entitled to high government pensions or benefit and are easier to defer and discipline. In addition, millions of state government employees work under federal grants, in effect administering federal programs. These cannot be cut directly.
That is so interesting. That is so interesting. That is exactly what happened. They cut them directly. Like these federal grants, they just killed them. They just cut them off. Like kids with cancer research for children. Grants for that were just killed.
Federal employment can be helpful and can provide a simple story to average citizens, but cutting functions, levels, funds, and grants is much more important than setting simple employment size. Simply reducing numbers can actually increase costs. OMB instructions following President Trump's employment freeze told agencies to consider buyout programs encouraging early retirements in order to shift costs from current budgets in agencies to the retirement system and minimize the number of personnel fire. The Environmental Protection Agency immediately implemented such a program, and OMB urged the passage of legislation to increase payout maximums from $25,000 to $40,000 to further increase spending under the cuts. President Clinton's OMB had introduced a similar buyout that cost the Treasury $2.8 billion, mostly for those who were going to retire anyway.
Wow, that is so fascinating.
Moreover, when a new employee is hired to fill a job recently vacated in a buyout, the government for a time is paying 2 people to fill 1 job. What is needed at the beginning is a freeze on all top career position hiring to prevent burrowing in by outgoing political appointees. Moreover, 4 factors determine the order in which employees are protected during layoff: tenure, veterans' preference, seniority, and performance in that order of importance. Despite several attempts in the House of Representatives during the Trump years to enact legislation that would modestly increase the weight given to performance over time of service, the fierce opposition by federal managers, associations, and unions representing long-serving but not necessarily well-performing constituents explains why the bills failed to advance. A determined president should insist that performance be first and be wary of costly types of reductions in force. Impenetrable bureaucracy. The GAO has identified almost 100 actions that the executive branch or Congress could take to improve efficient and effectiveness across 37 areas that span a broad range of government missions and functions. It identified 33 actions to address mission fragmentation, overlap, and duplication in the 12 areas of defense, economic development, health, homeland security, and information technology. It also identified 59 other opportunities for executive agencies or Congress to reduce the cost of government operations or enhance revenue collection across 25 areas of government. 20. A logical place to begin would be to identify and eliminate functions and programs that are duplicated across cabinet departments or spread across multiple agencies.
Interesting. I mean, they're looking for ways to eliminate federal government employees, but we came to find that that's completely irrelevant. They just went in and they fired them all, and no questions asked. They're not legally allowed to, but they did it anyway.
Congress hoped to help this effort by passing the government perform their missions, establish goals and objectives, and measure and report their performance to Congress. 3 decades of endless time-consuming reports later, the government continues to grow, but with more paper and little change either in performance or in the number of levels between government and the people. Constitution's Paul Light emphasizes the importance of the increasing number of levels between the top heads of departments and the people at the bottom who receive the products of government decision-making. He estimates that there are perhaps 50 or more levels of impenetrable bureaucracy and no way other than imperfect performance appraisals to communicate between them. 22. The Trump administration proposed some possible consolidations, but these were not received favorably in Congress, whose approval is necessary for most such proposals.
Well, as we came to find that, Congress's action is not necessary to do whatever Trump wanted to do.
The best solution is to cut functions and budgets and devolve responsibilities. That is a challenge primarily for presidents, Congress, and the entire government, but the OPM still needs to lead the way government-wide in managing personnel properly, even in any future smaller government. Creating a responsible career management service. The people elect a president who is charged by Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution 23 with seeing that the laws are faithfully executed, with his political appointees democratically linked to that legitimizing responsibility. An autonomous bureaucracy has neither independent constitutional status nor separate moral legitimacy. Therefore, career civil servants by themselves should not lead major policy changes and reforms. The creation of the Senior Executive Service was the top career change introduced by the 1978 Carter-Campbell Civil Service Reform Act. Its aim was to professionalize the career service and make it more responsible to the democratically elected commander-in-chief and his political appointees while respecting the rights due to career employees, very much including those in the top positions. The new SES would allow management to be more flexible in filling and reassigning executive positions and locations beyond narrow specialties for more efficient mission accomplishment and would provide pay and large bonuses to motivate career performance. The desire to infiltrate political appointees improperly into the high career civil service has been widespread in every administration, whether Democrat or Republican.
Interesting. So they're saying people putting political appointees into civil service has been a problem in both parties?
Democratic administrations, however, are typically more successful because they require the cooperation of careerists.
Just complete nonsense. No, that's absolutely not true. You know why there are fewer right-wing extremist partisan nutcases in government? Well, up until Trump took office, of course. Because the normal default position is not right-wing extremist nutcase behavior or thought. The default position is, wow, these people, they came over the border because they had nowhere else to go and they were from a war-torn area. Damn, that's really rough. Yeah, we should definitely try to help these people. That's what you think when you don't know, when you haven't heard any of the Republican extremist nonsense or any of the trash that comes out of Fox News. When you start hearing right-wing propaganda, then you start changing your position on the border. There is no reason to oppose immigration. There is no reason except right-wing extremism. That's why you might see fewer right-wing extremists in government, because they're just normal human beings.
Generally lean heavily to the left. Such burrowing in requires career job descriptions for new positions that closely mirror the functions of a political appointee, a special hiring authority that allows the bypassing of veterans' preference as well as other preference categories, and the ability to frustrate career candidates from taking the desired position. President Reagan's OPM began by limiting such SES burrowing in, arguing that the proper course was to create and fill political positions.
Right, so this is where Project 2025 is saying we want to eliminate federal workers and replace them with political, partisan, right-wing extremists. That's it.
This simultaneously promotes the CSRA principle of political leadership of the bureaucracy and respects the professional autonomy of the career service. But this requires that career SES employees should respect political rights too. Actions such as career staff reserving excessive numbers of key policy positions as career reserve to deny them to non-career SES employees frustrate CSRA intent. Another evasion is the general domination by career staff on SES personnel evaluation boards, the opposite of non-career executives dominating these critical meeting discussions as expected in the SES. Career training also often underplays the political role in leadership and inculcates career-first policy and value viewpoints. Frustrated with these activities by top career executives, the Trump administration issued Executive Order 1395724 to make career professionals in positions that are not normally subject to change as a result of a presidential transition, but who discharge significant duties and exercise significant discretion in formulating and implementing executive branch policy and programs.
They're saying Trump already signed an executive order, I guess in the first term, to make it so that he can just fire federal employees and replace them pretty much with political appointees, with political extremists, basically.
An exception to the competitive hiring rules and examinations for career positions under a new Schedule F. It ordered the director of OPM and agency heads to set procedures to prepare lists of such confidential, policy determining, policy making, or policy advocating positions, and prepare procedures to create exceptions from civil service rules when careerists hold such positions, from which they can relocate back to the regular civil service after such service. The order was subsequently reversed by President Biden 25 at the demand of the civil service associations and unions. It should be reinstated, but SES responsibility should come first. Managing personnel in a union environment. Historically, unions were thought to be incompatible with government management. There's a natural limit to the bargaining power of private sector unions, but the financial bottom line of public sector unions is not similarly constrained. If private
Interesting. So they're kind of attacking unions right now.
sector unions push too hard a bargain, they can so harm a company or so reduce efficiency that their employer is forced to go out of business and eliminate union jobs altogether.
When has that happened? Ever? Give me one example of that ever happening in American history of a union bargaining to the point that the company shuts down, getting so much from a company that it shuts down. I'll take one. Unions fight for workers' rights. There has always been a struggle between filthy rich and working class. Unions are just about the only tool that we have to fight against filthy rich people taking control of the entire system and keeping it. Unions are so incredibly valuable. And the only reason anybody would ever argue against unions is because they're trying to help the filthy rich. They're trying to help billionaires, wittingly or not, whether they even realize that's what they're doing. That's the only effect. Now we know how Trump disagreed with Project 2025 because even the Heritage Foundation understood the limitations of what was allowed by law. Trump just didn't care about what was or wasn't allowed. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Just came in and took a razor to everything.
There is no such limit in government, which cannot go out of business, so demands can be excessive without negatively affecting employee and union bottom lines. Even Democratic President Franklin Roosevelt considered union representation in the federal government to be incompatible with democracy.
Who? What are you talking about? Is that even true? I don't give a fuck. Unions are the only line that we have to fight against the government or against, it's the only line of attack we have to fight against billionaires, against filthy rich. It's all we've got. And the filthy rich have always put a lot of money into preventing unions from existing. In fact, Amazon had a union vote a few years ago. I don't remember. It's been forever now. But they had a union vote. And when the vote took place, Amazon did all the same voter suppression garbage that the Republicans have been doing up to this point. They claimed that, there was a miscount and that, people slipped ballots in when they weren't supposed to be. They had, ballot stuffing and all kinds of other shit. They lied about all of it. They used all the same tactics that governments use to lie about voting systems. They used all the same tactics to do vote suppression. Companies take advantage of people. They always have. And we need a system that protects people from being taken advantage of, like unions.
Striking and even threats of bargaining and delay were considered acts against the people and thus improper. It was not until President John Kennedy that union representation in the federal government was recognized, and then merely by executive order. Labor bargaining was not set in statute until the Carter administration was forced by Congress to do so in order to pass the CSRA, although all bargaining was placed under OPM review. The CSRA was able to maintain strong management rights for the OPM and agencies, and forbade collective bargaining on pay and benefit, as well as management prerogatives. Over time, OPM, FLRA, and agencies' personnel, office, and courts, especially in Democratic administrations, narrowed management rights so that labor bargaining expanded as management rights contracted. But the management rights are still in statute, have been enforced by some administrations, and should be enforced again by any future OPM and agency managements, which should not be intimidated by union power. Rather than being daunted, President Trump issued 3 executive orders. Executive Order 13836, encouraging agencies to renegotiate all union collective bargaining agreements to ensure consistency with the law and respect for management rights. 26. Executive Order 13837, encouraging agencies to prevent union representatives from using office time preparing or pursuing grievances or from engaging in other union activity on government time. 27. And Executive Order 13839, encouraging agencies both to limit labor grievances on removals from service or on challenging performance appraisals, and to prioritize performance over seniority when deciding who should be retained following reductions in force. 28. All were revoked by the Biden administration 29 and should be reinstated by the next administration.
Yeah, they're just trying to destroy collective bargaining. They're trying to destroy unions, trying to destroy any tool that we have to fight against the filthy rich. Again, this is how it works throughout history.
To include the immediate appointment of the FLRA General Counsel and reactivation of the impasses panel. Congress should also consider whether public sector unions are appropriate in the first place. The bipartisan consensus up until the middle of the 20th century held that these unions were not compatible with constitutional government. 30. After more than half a century of experience with public sector union frustrations of good government management.
Yeah, Chris Swift says, management rights, please. Yes, those poor managers having their rights taken away. Oh, you got to feel bad for those managers, right? The managers that make the decisions about how much people make. Poor guys, they didn't do anything to anybody and they're just being mistreated. They need rights too, right?
It is hard to avoid reaching the same conclusion. Fully staffy the ranks of political appointees. The president must rely legally on his top department and agency officia to run the government and on top White House staff employees to coordinate operations through regular cabinet and other meetings and communications. Without this political leadership, the career civil service becomes empowered to lead the executive branch without democratic legitimacy. While many obstacles stand in his way, a president is constitutionally and statutorily required to fill the top political positions in the executive branch, both to assist him and to provide overall legitimacy. Most presidents have had some difficulty obtaining congressional approval of their appointees, but this has worsened recently. After the 2016 election, President Trump faced special hostility from the opposition party and the media in getting his appointees confirmed or even considered by the Senate.
Because they were hacks, and they're even worse this go around.
His early Office of Presidential Personnel, PPO, did not generally remove political appointees from the previous administration, but instead relied mostly on prior political appointees and career civil servants to run the government. Such a reliance on holdovers and bureaucrats led to a lack of agency control and the absolute refusal of the acting attorney general from the Obama administration to obey a direct order from the president. The early PPO...
Okay, I don't know what they're talking about here. The Attorney General refused to work with Donald Trump? I have no clue what they're going on about.
The Trump administration appointed fewer political appointees in its first few months in office than had been appointed in any recent presidency, partly because of historically high partisan congressional obstructions, but also because several officia announced that they preferred fewer political appointees in the agencies as a way to cut federal spending. Whatever the reasoning, this had the effect of permanently hampering the rollout of the new president's agenda. Thus, in those critical early years, much of the government relied on senior careerists and holdover Obama appointees to carry out the sensitive responsibilities that would otherwise belong to the new president's appointees.
Yeah, they shouldn't belong to the new president's appointees. There shouldn't be appointees. The government should just function. Like the EPA, it shouldn't be filled with like right-wing nutcases. They should just be there to do their jobs. That's it. And be well-informed and well-qualified for the position. They are literally complaining that the government is not politicized enough. Remember all that shit that they talked about, how the politicized justice system is hurting people, politicized government, and all that other shit? That's literally what they did. That's what they're talking about right now.
Fortunately, the later PPO, OPM, and Senate leadership began to cooperate to build a strong team to implement the president's personnel appointment agenda. Any new administration would be wise to learn that it will need a full cadre of sound political appointees from the beginning if it expects to direct this enormous federal bureaucracy. A close relationship between the PPO at the White House and the OPM, coordinating with agency assistant secretaries of administration, and PPO's chosen White House liaisons and their staff at each agency is essential to the management of this large, multi-level, resistant, and bureaucratic challenge. If personnel is policy is to be our general guide, it would make sense to give the president direct supervision of the bureaucracy with the OPM director available in his cabinet.
Yeah, except we don't want centralized power. There should be checks and balances. This document is talking about how to remove the checks and balances.
A reformed bureaucracy. Today, the federal government's bureaucracy cannot even meet its own civil service ideals.
Yeah, Chris Swift says, but see, when it's them, it's different. They're the main characters, yeah.
The merit criteria of ability, knowledge, and skills are no longer the basis for recruitment, selection, or advancement, while pay and benefit for comparable work are substantially above those in the private sector. Retention is not based...
That's bullshit. They just made that shit up. Pay and benefits are substantially better than in the private sector? No, they're not. This is studied and determined to be false. They're just making it up.
Primarily on performance, and for the most part, inadequate performance is not appraised, corrected, or punished. The authors have made many suggestions here that, if implemented, could bring that bureaucracy more under control and enable it to work more efficient and responsibly, which is...
Well, what they mean is, if implemented, it would turn the state into an arm of the president. What he wanted would go. No checks and balances, no accountability, no nothing. They're forced to do what the president wants. That's what it would do. And that's what they want, of course.
Especially required for the half of civilian government that administers its undeniable responsibilities for defense and foreign affairs. While a better administered central bureaucracy is crucial for both those and domestic responsibilities, the problem of properly running the government goes beyond simple bureaucratic administration. The specified deficiency of the federal bureaucracy, size, levels of organization, inefficient, expense, and lack of responsiveness to political leadership are rooted in the progressive ideology that unelected experts can and should be trusted to promote the general welfare.
Yes, absolutely. Scientists should be trusted to create regulation for the EPA. And they're not unaccountable. There are ways to fire them. They just want them to be political appointees is the problem.
In just about every area of social life. The Constitution, however, reserved a few enumerated powers to the federal government, while leaving the great majority of domestic activities to state, local, and private governance. As James Madison explained, the powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects, which, in the ordinary course of affair, concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people.
James Madison would be fucking disgusted with what these people are doing. If he knew that they were creating a dictatorship, he would have intentionally, specifically, and explicitly written in sections in the Constitution to prevent what they're doing right now.
And the internal has simply given the national government more to do than the complex separation of powers Constitution allows. That progressive system has broken down in our time, and the only real solution is for the national government to do less, to decentralize and privatize as much as possible, and then ensure that the remaining bureaucracy is managed effective along the line.
That's the thing, that they don't want to decentralize. They are centralizing. You can say you want to decentralize all you want, but you literally just described centralizing power.
Lines of the enduring principles set out in detail here. Authors note, the authors are grateful for the collaborative work of the individuals listed as contributors to this chapter for the 2025 Presidential Transition Project. The authors alone assume responsibility.
Anyway, yeah, that's the end of the section. Section 1 of Project 2025. That is psychotic stuff, man. Psychotic stuff. Tell me what you think about it in the comments.